Hi, you guys. It's Professor Daniel here, and I'm back with Chapter 11. So let's dive right in. So, Chapter 11 in your text is titled The Peculiar Institution, and it's really all about slavery and the impact that it has on the South, particularly the Southern economy. So, your book opens up discussing why it's called the peculiar institution. So, slavery is often called the peculiar institution because it's an institution at this point that is unique to the South. While many portions of the United States had slavery, the North had slavery in the 18th century, for example, by the 19th century, Northern states began to gradually do away with slavery, gradually abolish slavery. And so it becomes an institution that is particularly unique to the South. In this chapter, we'll be discussing antebellum Southern society. So the word antebellum means before the Civil War. So if you see the word antebellum, you know it means before the Civil War. So your book also refers to the Mason-Dixon line. The Mason-Dixon line was the dividing line between slavery and freedom. By the time we get to this point, the 19th century in the United States or in United States history, in the South, there are approximately 4 million enslaved people living in the South, and they will make up about 1/3 of the Southern population. Okay, so let's move forward. By the 19th century, cotton had replaced sugar as the world's major crop produced by slave labor. So prior to the 19th century, the largest crop produced by slave labor was sugar, and it was in really high demand. But by the time we get to the 19th century, cotton has taken that place, and cotton has replaced sugar as the world's major crop that is produced by slave labor. Now, you have to recall that the early industrial revolution is really focused on factories that will produce cotton textiles. So in the North, that is quickly industrializing, a lot of these factories produce cotton textiles, and the cotton comes from the southern part of the United States. Now, the Old South is the largest and the most powerful slave society in the modern world. And it's so powerful that by the 19th century, the United States, or specifically the southern United States, has a monopoly on cotton production. Okay, this monopoly is so strong that 75% of the world's cotton came from the southern United States. So when you hear people say that cotton is king, this is why. 75% of all cotton in the entire modern world comes from the southern United States. It is produced by slave labor, and it's really helped by this second Middle Passage. So in the beginning of the semester, we talked about the Middle Passage as the second leg in the triangular trading routes that make up this triangle of world trade. The second Middle Passage refers to this shift of slaves coming or enslaved persons coming from Africa to this trade from the older southern states to the deep South. So on January 1st, 1808, Congress prohibited the further importation of enslaved persons from Africa. So by 1808, the United States doesn't get any more African slaves. However, by that time, they don't really need to get slaves from Africa anymore. The slave population has reproduced itself, and so it's not necessary at this point. Now, they made the decision to wait 20 years, and that will bring you to 1808, because after the Revolutionary War, a number of persons of African descent decided to leave with the British. As if you recall, the British said, if you escape to fight for us, you'll have your freedom. And so the United States will wait 20 years to replenish that slave population. So by 1808 is when they stop the importation of African slaves, right? So a lot of you guys on previous quizzes were mistaken by this. Slavery in the United States is not abolished in 1808. They just stopped getting slaves from Africa in 1808. But again, it's not necessary, and a major slave trade will develop within the United States. You have enslaved persons who are sold to areas of the Deep South, such as Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi, because these are the areas of major cotton production, right? And so cotton is something that will fuel, or that will help to fuel, the Second Middle Passage. Between 1820 and 1860, more than 2 million slaves are sold, and usually sold to the Deep South. So if you're following on your PowerPoint, you'll notice that on slide 5, I have a chart, or a picture, an infographic, I guess you could call it, where it shows the movement of enslaved persons from these older slave states such as Virginia to the Deep South. Okay, and by 1860, more than 2 million enslaved persons had been sold to the Deep South. Now, slavery will lead the South down a very different path of economic development. In the North, they have factories. And again, these factories, a lot of the factories will focus on textile production. But of course, because by this time we have had this market revolution that we discussed in chapter 9, you'll also have factories that produce steel and iron for locomotives. However, slavery will lead the South down a very different path of economic development. They won't have factories because they don't need factories. They have human factories known as enslaved persons. So the South, or in the South, there will be a pretty limited growth of industry. You won't have a lot of factory development in the South because their focus really is on the sale and trade of persons. Now, because there aren't many factories, it will also discourage immigration. So this wave of immigration that the United States will experience in the 19th century, a lot of these immigrants will not go to the South because the South, A, does not have factories, which means they don't have jobs. They don't have jobs for people. So a lot of our immigration will really be focused on the North and Northeast. Because there is not a lot of factory development, there is not a lot of growth of industry, it will also inhibit technological progress. If you don't have to change, a lot of the time you won't change. Now, also, while there are banks in the South, it's not like the South is completely undeveloped. There are banks and there are people who are making lots of money from the sale and trade of enslaved persons. However, a lot of these banks really exist to finance plantations. So if you are poor, if you don't have any land, you're not able to participate in this financial uprising, or you could say, that slavery provides. Because in order to be able to really participate in the slave trade, you have to have a good amount of money, and a lot of these people do not. The biggest city in the Old South is New Orleans. So just a bit of information, the biggest city in the Old South at this point is New Orleans. Now, slavery will not only impact how the South develops economically, it'll also really shape race relations. It will shape politics and religion and the law. So just for some clarification, most families don't own slaves, okay? Most families do not own slaves. So the largest population of Southerners at this time would be your yeomen or everyday ordinary farmers. And a lot of these small white farmers will live outside of the plantation belt and a lot of hilly areas that are generally unsuitable for cotton production. So in order to produce cotton, you need flat land, you need fertile land. And not only do you need flat and fertile land, but you also need lots of it. Because in order to, you can't plant cotton on the same plot of land over and over because it sucks the nutrients from the soil. So you have to be skilled in crop rotation. You have to be able to give that soil some rest to really gain those nutrients back. But most farmers, most small farmers at this time, raised livestock and they grew food for their families. So again, most people don't own slaves at this point. They're really raising livestock and they're growing food to support their families. The class of people who do own slaves are known as the planter class. So please don't confuse the term planter with the term farmer. When I refer to the planter class, I'm referring to this wealthy class of people who have a lot of land and typically have enslaved persons to work that land. So plantations, according to Frederick Douglass, the plantation was, quote, a little nation by itself with its own language, its own rules, regulations, and customs. Now, fewer than 2,000 families actually owned more than 100 slaves. Because of this technical difficulty, I'm going to pause here and come right back to the planter class. I'll see you in part 2.